So this video I'm going to talk about preparing for the final side planking layer, which is the pretty wood. So it's my lumber, genuine mahogany lumber layer. And I'll show this picture, this diagram again, just to remind where we are in this process. So here's a cross section of the chine. And so the first layer that I applied planking was on the bottom. That's what this is showing. Remember, the boat's flipped over. The second layer was the first layer on the sides, and then I just started overlapping. Then the next layer was the second layer on the bottom here, and then the next layer was the second layer on the sides. You can see how they overlap. And then the third layer of these are all cold molded planking layers of plywood. So the next one is this third layer of planking here. And now I'm ready for this outer layer right here, which is the final veneer. I used 5mm genuine mahogany lumber for that. So that's where we are. We're applying this, preparing to apply this layer of planking. So on the sides up front, what I wanted to show is, if you remember from previous videos, this edge did not look like this. These edges kind of made it in sort of a pseudo butt joint. But what you have to do here is, since at least the way my planking is going to be done, since I'm getting ready for the final planking layer on the sides, I have to make room for my last planking layer, which will be on the bottom. So the fourth planking layer on the bottom is what will be last. So I need an edge or some way of dealing with that. So I had to make this edge up front basically flush. I couldn't have an edge here already. So it's a little hard to see. So what I had to do is take my sander and sand all of this basically kind of close to flush in a way. And so this top edge, if you notice where the sanding is right here, that becomes the edge of where my final side planking layer, this piece that goes along here, will end up being. So if you notice back here, this part of the boat, that final side planking layer, which will run this way lengthwise of the boat, it will come up and towards the back of the boat actually lap up, and it'll be sanded flush on the top. But up in here, you can't do that because the angles of this bottom and side they're much closer, so that there's not a steep enough or a different enough angle where you can do that. So you have to watch that edge up in here. So this top edge, if you notice, it just continues on, and that's where that top edge of that planking will be applied. So that is something that you've got to deal with depending on how you do your planking. Again, it's the way that, because the way I did my planking, that's what I had to do. So then I have a way to deal with this edge up in here. And later on I'll talk about the transition joint, because you got to worry about that too, but that's coming later in the build. So this is just showing the other side of the boat where I did similar sanding. So you can see this corner, this edge right here, as it goes all the way to the front. And that's where my side planking needs to be mated to. And also in preparations for the final planking on the side, you can see my pieces up here, is I went ahead and drove screws in. When you read the plans, they talk about driving screws, I think every 4 inches along the chine and the shear and all along the battens. They may actually talk about nails, I forget which, but I decided to use screws, and I wanted these screws to be before my final side planking layer because I didn't want to have screw holes in my pretty wood for the final layer. But that's what I decided to do. So I ran screws all along here and then also down here along the shear, and I think they were 4 inches apart. And then this is showing what I decided to do also is run a line of screws along the middle batten on the side. And so what I'm trying to do here is basically I use magnets on both the inside and outside the boat to find out where the batten exactly was, because it's hard to know. I know it's roughly in this particular area, but I had to do that, and I needed help. Somebody on the outside held the magnet, and then I held it on the inside and was able to kind of move it along and make marks that way. And I did screws about every foot, I think, along this middle batten, and then filled them in. You can see where this is later on where I used wood filler to fill them in, and that's, you can see this is where the wood filler is still drying. And I did along here this year as well. And here's what it looks like after all those screw holes are filled. And then what I ended up doing is 2 coats of CPES on the sides before I did my final planking layer. Up here you can see the lumber again there. So both sides, again, I applied 2 coats of CPES in preparation. And that's shown, I think, after the second coat. So that's how I prepared for the final side planking. And as far as marking the boards, I've got another video about talking about how I lined off the hull in preparation for the side planking.